Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fully Charged Show podcast. My name is Robert Llewellyn. I'm the founder and old man of the Fully Charged Show. It's been going for 13 years now. The YouTube series, not the podcast. Podcast's only been going for about 4 or 5 years. Can't even remember. It's been going a long time, and we get some amazing guests on, and we've got some amazing guests on today. But today's guests, so there's 2 guests on today's podcast, and they are so good at communicating the positive aspects of electric vehicle usership, drivership, ownership. Just brilliant. Because I think I was feeling a little ground down by the negative torrents of misinformation, particularly in the Murdoch press. It really is difficult to kind of counter all that nonsense. And the ridiculous, nasty, stupid comments made by Giles Corran, who I know, who said, "Oh, my electric car didn't work." Anyway, who cares? Who cares? You know, he said, I'm getting rid of my electric car. I'm going back to diesel. Well, good luck to you, sunshine. Just go into a diesel filling station and fill that tank with that filthy, expensive, imported, toxic fossil fuel. Good luck to you. I'm sick to the back teeth of hearing about him, even though he wrote a beautiful review of my first book. I'm sick to the death to hearing any more comments from him. And now what's going to happen now is I've said this, somehow someone will tell him I said it, he'll hear it, I'll meet him somewhere. It'll be slightly embarrassing. Anyway, I just want to mention that the one of our speakers today, Gill Nowell, is from ElectriX, which is a company that encourages and informs people about electric cars. They are part of the LV Insurance Group, but I mean, it goes way beyond selling insurance. This is an absolute passionate thing for Gill. She's such an amazing advocate for electric vehicles and does it from such a kind of feet on the ground, direct first-hand experience point of view. And they're the headline sponsors of Fully Charged Live Farnborough, which is coming up on the 28th to the 30th of April. And also Fully Charged Live Harrogate, which we are very excited. Another first show. What is Harrogate going to be like? I'm really excited. It's going to be different, very different to Farnborough. But Fully Charged Live Harrogate is from the 19th to the 21st of May. So if you're anywhere around, I'd say from Cheshire to the Scottish borders, I would love you to come along and see, because these shows are really special events. Now I'm really getting a hang of what it does translate. The idea is behind it translates, and there's a lot of really exciting stuff going on. I mustn't go on too long about it all, but so we're joined today basically by Gill Nowell, who I've already mentioned from ElectriX, and Jon Burdekin, who is from Burdekin Consultancy, which he really gets how fleets operate, how fleets use electric vehicles when they're suitable for fleets. He's doing a lot of stuff in that area, and individuals as well. So really good, practical advice. If you know anyone who's dithering and considering maybe getting an electric car, is not sure, if you've already got one, or if you yourself are listening to this because you haven't got an electric car but you're considering it, just listen to these people talk. They just know their stuff. And they're really, really, really inspiring. So there we go. That's enough. I'm going to shut up. I'll briefly say goodbye at the end of this podcast, but that's it from me. Please welcome to the Fully Charged podcast, Gill Nowell and Jon Burdekin. Thank you both, Jon and Gill, for joining us on this, joining us today for this. I mean, just before we start, can you just give a bit of background? Because I know a bit of yours, Gill, because I know you've done all sorts of things. But Jon, let's start with you, Jon. How you got to what you're doing now and what you're doing now would kind of help us put it in context.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Robert. My background is in company car leasing. So I was working with a company called Alphabet, who are owned by BMW, for about 15 years, and I headed up their consultancy team. Owned by BMW. BMW launched the i3 back in 2013, I think, and Alphabet were expected to be the go-to point of knowledge for all leasing electric cars, and I headed up that project. It was called Alpha Electric. So I was there trying to convince corporate organizations to make the transition to electric when there were frankly only really 4 cars to choose from. I think it was the Leaf, the Zoe, the i3 and the Tesla S at the time. So I started my electric journey back in 2013, and 4 years ago, I set myself up as my own business, really, and I'm now an independent fleet consultant, specializing in talking about electric vehicles and salary sacrifice, helping leasing companies, leasing brokers, training for the BVRLA, and just helping people understand what they need to do to make the transition to electric, and busting a few myths and FUD along the way.
Right. And I mean, would you say, I mean, because I think I know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Would you say in that time that generally public attitudes have changed, or just individual people's attitudes have changed? You know, because I can remember trying to talk to people about electric vehicles when it was those 4 cars available.
Yes. Yeah.
And it was quite a steep hill to climb. But I mean, if you notice now, if you go into a company that doesn't have electric cars to discuss them maybe adopting that for their fleet, are they more amenable to that idea?
Absolutely, and it's interesting because back in the day, one of my clients was Hewlett Packard, the laptop and electronics people, and they had about 400 cars in their fleet, and I did some analysis with them on whole life cost. So the theory of if you moved to electric, and I proved I could save them £750,000 on paper.
Right.
And I did some journey pattern analysis to say, okay, of the journeys you do, 67% of the fleet could go electric based on the range of the vehicles we were going to try and get them into. So you'd think, well, that's an absolute no-brainer. It didn't go anywhere because I could only offer them 4 cars. That's where the change has come, because we can still do those analyses, but the outcome of those is now, oh, right, okay, I didn't realize it was actually really doable. And I think a lot of people have still got some of the mindset of 7-8 years ago. The charging infrastructure is nowhere it needs to be. Maybe the range of a car is only 100 miles. It's surely too early to go electric. And actually, when they know the real facts of doing it, you can really give some comfort and reassurance to these drivers and fleets that actually it's entirely doable right now.
Right.
Slightly more of a challenge with the van fleets, of course, but in the car world, absolutely, absolutely easy. It just needs a little bit of education and mindset.
Jill, we've known each other for I don't want to say a while, a short time, but I've lost track with what you used to do. So can you do the same? Just a rough step guide to what you've been doing the last few years, because it's very varied and very creative.
Thanks very much, Robert. So I think we've known each other for about a decade.
Right,
for
yes.
about 10
Feels
years. Right. So it was back in 2012 when I was working on a series of EV grid integration projects.
Yes.
And that really sparked my enthusiasm for electric vehicles. You know, I had my first test drive in a Nissan Leaf back in 2012, absolutely smitten from that point on. And I think literally on a daily basis since then, I just do everything I can to advocate for the uptake of the EV, to help people overcome any common concerns they may have, and to really highlight the benefits of switching to electric cars. So during lockdown, I was a co-founding director of Electric Vehicle Association England. And my current role then is head of EV communications for LV General Insurance and ElectriX, which is LV's relatively new EV proposition. So this is where you can come to ElectriX for all the information you might need to help you make an informed switch to going EV. But also you can come to us for your electric car lease, whether that's personal, business, or actually salary sacrifice. Also your home charger, and of course your insurance. So that's kind of bringing us up to date on that front, and it's great to be here.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I mean, I think, you know, one of the things that I always have a little alarm bell going off in the back of my mind, in the fact that, you know, a huge amount of our viewers are outside the UK, and listeners are outside the UK. But actually, I think what we're talking about is relevant is globally. You know, I know there are companies, for instance, I've just been in Australia, there's very similar schemes there. And obviously, you know, there's different variations of car leasing, I think, around the world. But I mean, it's a really important thing, and particularly with fleets, I know that's happening big time, you know, all around the world.
Yeah, that's right, and I think it's a global issue, isn't it? You know, there's no doubt that there's a major move across the globe to shifting towards cleaner and more sustainable forms of transport. You know, we know we need to reduce our carbon emissions. We know we need to clean up our local air quality, and you know, electric cars are a prime tool in order to help us do that. You know, in the UK, we're committed to no new sales of petrol and diesel cars by 2030. I think Norway is ahead of the game with a 2025 date. And, you know, European Parliament has just set out a date of banning internal combustion engine sales from 2035, although there's a little bit of pushback there from some areas. So, you know, but I think by and large, you know, wherever you live in the world, if you do have access to that information and knowledge, if you do have access to, you know, beneficial tax rates, for example. So that's a big driver at the moment in the UK that makes business leasing salary sacrifice so attractive to a lot of people. And, you know, I think especially if you can charge at home, I know not everybody can, but if you can, then it just makes it so cheap and so convenient. You know, it costs me less than £5 to fully charge my car.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
How you get there and when you get there might change, but everybody's aiming at the same end game.
No, I think you're right. I mean, can you? I was going to ask John this, Jill, because I know you know as well. But I just want to make sure because every time I hear it, I have to learn it again. It's a piece of information that might stay in my brain, which is salary sacrifice. Because what salary sacrifice sounds like is you're sacrificing your salary. And I want to know how, you know, can you explain what salary sacrifice is primarily, I think, for people in the UK, but also overseas are going to go, what does that mean?
And you're right. There are some people who think, well, sacrifice sounds like it's got a negative implication.
Yeah.
Possibly a slightly darker implication. But yeah, so salary sacrifice, here's what happens. As an employee, you agree to a change in your terms and conditions of employment, and you agree to give up part of your salary. If you are paid less, you will be taxed less. In the UK, you will pay less income tax and you will pay less national insurance on the lower salary. In return for that drop in salary, you are given a company car. In every way, a company car. And in the UK, on a company car, you will pay something called company car tax, which is heavily incentivized towards electric vehicles. So if the tax that you pay on the car is lower than the tax that you save on your salary, there, in a nutshell, is the tax efficiency of salary sacrifice. It's just a blend of established tax principles, income tax, national insurance, and company car tax, and just playing them in a different way to unlock quite significant tax efficiencies.
Right, and it's not a new thing that was created for electric vehicles, but it's been adjusted to make having an electric vehicle a huge advantage. Is that
exactly? Your listeners may be familiar with salary sacrifice applied in the pensions industry. They may be familiar with it with cycle to work schemes. Back in the day, before HMRC applied some legislation around this, people were offering salary sacrifice schemes on luxury holidays and fine wines and watches. That got stamped out. But the relevant things like pensions, like cars, like cycle to work, like childcare vouchers or creches at work, these things can be salary sacrifice, and it's just a more efficient way of paying for them.
Right. And then, I mean, one of the things that Jill mentioned there, which I'd like to ask you both this, but it is there is the obvious, there's the very, very painfully obvious side of local air quality, of CO2 emissions, of, even on a kind of global political level, of being dependent on external countries for a critically important part of our fueling infrastructure. There's the argument to wean ourselves off fossil fuels are long and all very valid. But I think it is the cost one that is the one that's kind of confusing for people, because there's no arguing at the moment. The average electric car is more expensive than the average petrol car that's roughly the same size, power, number of seats, etc. But the economic argument is the one that I think has the biggest sway. Once you take the entire thing, and that's the hard argument. Yes, it costs more to buy, but when you're running it, I mean, at the moment, this is a really good example. It's sunny here at my house, which is in March in the UK. And my car is charging on 100% solar power now, because it goes through my little zappy charger. It's only taking the power off the panels. That if the house starts using it, it stops charging the car. When the house stops using it, it starts charging the car. I'm getting free fuel.
Yes.
And that's a really hard thing to explain to people. It does not costing me a penny.
It is. And regardless of your circumstances, whether you're a company car driver, retail public car driver, it's important to look at what you've just described as whole life cost, because you're right, they are more expensive to buy or lease. but they're predominantly cheaper to run. So you do factor in the inverted commas fuel. You do factor in the running costs. If you're a company car driver, you factor in the tax incentives. If you're an employer, you factor in the accounting incentive. And when you roll up all of that together, it starts to become a very, very compelling financial argument. But you need to look at the right numbers. If you're just looking at the purchase price or the lease rental, you're probably never going to unlock the benefits, financial or environmental or both, of an electric car. So I spend a lot of time trying to educate people to look in the right, look at it through a different lens. And I use an analogy of a holiday. If I'm going to offer you 2 holidays, holiday A has got flights of £2,000, but the overall cost is £7,000. Holiday B is a cheaper holiday, but the flights are more expensive. Which one are you going to go for? You're going to go for the cheaper holiday overall because you're looking at the whole life cost of the holiday. You're not just looking at the one with the most expensive or cheapest flights. So people are comfortable looking at that way for a holiday when you factor in transfers, accommodation, spending money, all these kind of things. That's whole life cost on a holiday. All we're doing is trying to get people to apply that methodology to looking at the running of a car.
So it's probably worth saying as well that we did a really, really big piece of work at LV called the Electric Car Cost Index, looking at all of the costs involved, really, really crunching the numbers on, I think we looked at 13 electric cars compared with their petrol and diesel equivalents, crunched all the numbers, and we found that in terms of running costs, on average, electric cars come out 47% cheaper on running costs, especially if you can charge at home. And I think we were a little bit surprised, I think, to find that on average, even insurance for electric cars is on average a little, it can be a little bit cheaper as well. So it is really important to, I think it's about helping people to look at all the costs involved, isn't it? And of course, when you can break down in terms of leasing to what we'd hope would be manageable monthly payments as well, that helps. And it's just sharing our own personal experience as well, actually living with an electric car. What does that look like? What does that mean? 12,000 miles, charging mostly off peak at home overnight is £360. It's, it's brilliant. And I don't know what that would be in petrol or diesel terms, but, an awful lot more.
An awful lot more.
And the rising energy costs, I think, naturally are on so many people's minds at the moment. So that's something that people are thinking more and more about, because, we know that public charging has become more expensive. In the UK, there's no getting away from that. So I was really, really curious to understand if that was, or would that affect people making the switch to EV. So I did one of my polls. I do have a tendency to do these, I must admit. But I had nearly 4,500 responses to this particular one that I was really, really pleased with. And I asked the question to electric car drivers, if you had the choice again, in spite of rising electricity costs, would you still choose to go electric? And 83% of people came back and said yes, they would. I think 8% were undecided. So, that's a big majority of people there.
It's fairly enormous.
Absolutely. And actually what was interesting was in all the comments, going through them all, yes, of course it's about cost, but it's also about other things as well. It is about the environment. It is about the drive experience, as well, because I think, arguably they are just much nicer to drive,
They're better. Yes. But then I think the other one that I was talking about recently to a guy that I met who was a mechanic and is now sells caravans. So he's not upset about this. He's moved on. But he was talking about, he never serviced any electric cars. He kind of left the business before it became a thing. But he knows the company he worked for are now retraining people to service electric cars. But he said he's looked at loads of electric cars and he went, what do you do? And I think this is a really key thing, because I'd forgotten, because I've driven electric cars so long, I've forgotten how often and how much it costs me to just maintain perfectly decent, relatively, maybe secondhand, but not completely knackered petrol and diesel cars. It costs a lot of money to keep them on the road because they get through a lot of spare parts, they need their oil change, all those things. I kind of forgotten because I don't do that anymore. You know, you have to have your car serviced and checked for safety, but it's minute in comparison with what I used to spend.
I can give you a very current example on that, Robert. My EV6,
Right.
one of my two EVs, is in for its 20,000 mile service on Monday. And
Right.
we'll be taking it to an independent garage who are specialist in electric vehicles, doesn't have to be the dealer, but it's going to be serviced for £130. So in 20,000 miles and 1 year, the tyres are still absolutely fine. So there's no tyre replacement. So this is £130, which will last me another 20,000 miles worth of driving. Damn right, there's an economic argument towards electric cars.
Yeah. Yes. No, it is. I mean, and I think that is one of the things we've discussed a great deal is the complexity and difficulty of the existing car industry to adjust to that, because servicing cars was a major part of their income. I mean, that's how they could sell a petrol and diesel car cheaply, because they knew you have to keep going back to keep the thing on the road. You know, that was kind of factored into their initial costs, which is something that's a really difficult thing to untangle, and as to why electric cars are more expensive. But you know, so what you're saying? I think you were saying this, Jill. That isn't and from your survey, cost isn't the one and only single factor that people might go for an electric vehicle. I mean, it seems to be a wider series of choices behind their decision.
Yeah, absolutely. I think certainly on a personal level as well. And I think if we're thinking about businesses as well, whether that's, you know, kind of business leasing or salary sacrifice schemes as well, you know, so many companies these days have really, really robust sustainability targets that they need to meet. And, you know, supporting their employees to go electric really, really ticks that box in terms of sustainability. So I think that's really important as well.
In some of the training that we do, we come across other areas, and you know, why are you interested in going electric, whether you're a fleet or a driver? And some, yes, cost comes across, yes, environment comes across, yes, they're nice to drive comes across, but I come across some quite interesting ones as well. So clean air zones in the UK is becoming more and more of a reason, because they're becoming visible in the Birminghams of this world, or Sheffield's just gone live, or Glasgow or whatever. So people are starting to realise that they could be forced down that road, and actually this is a good thing to do. I've actually had people say, why are you going electric? Because they think it's the cool new thing to do. And I thought, really? It's, you know, people who like to be at the cutting edge of tech are looking at that, and I'm thinking, okay, fine, I'll take, you know, whatever your reason's great. But yeah, there's 7 or 8 different reasons in there, and it doesn't really matter which the reason is, provided they're going down that road.
I mean, I had a very good well, no, it wasn't a good experience. It was a savage reminder. A couple of days ago, we were filming in Leeds, and we stayed in a hotel in Leeds, and I got up early because I'm still a bit jet lagged, and went out for a walk. And I walked through this beautiful woodland that was near the things. We're on the edge of Leeds. Lovely beck running through it, lovely, you know, beautiful view. So in the sort of edge of the Yorkshire Dales, but very much the sort of suburban edge. Lovely place. Then I had to get back to the hotel. I had to walk along a busy road, which, you know, it wasn't difficult. It was a dead straight road, but it was of course rush hour. It was early in the morning, and I walked past some thousands of petrol and diesel cars sitting in slow moving traffic, you know, and then they'd stop, then and all that stuff. The smell was shocking. I think partly because I'd been out in the woods and it had been really fresh morning. I would hear birds singing, and their way back to the hotel was along this road. And I just go, that is normal, and we're all used to that. And I had to keep reminding myself, no, this is what people breathe every day. It's just normal. It's considered completely acceptable. Those vehicles, some of the people would argue, are burning clean diesel, which I find a very difficult concept to deal with. You know, it did not smell clean to me when I was walking past them.
Do you know what? I had similar experience on the school run. Well, I was walking. I wasn't in the car. So walking back from dropping my daughter at school earlier this week, and I don't live in an area with loads and loads of traffic, but it was enough to make me think, whoa, you know, that's not pleasant. I could really smell it and taste it. But if I can just kind of trot out a statistic here, which I think which keeps me kind of grounded. is that, the Committee on Climate Change tells us that in order for us to be in with a chance of meeting our climate change goals in the UK, by 2030, we need 16 million all-electric cars on our roads.
Right.
And I think current forecasts suggest that we will achieve between 8 to 10 million by 2030.
Right.
So we're kind of not, we've got a long way
No,
to
we're
go.
not.
We've
Oh,
got a
goodness.
long
Yeah.
way to go.
And it's also, I mean, it is that thing that, that it's just a huge transition. And it's also the other thing that I know that we were discussing earlier about the charging infrastructure, because I don't know how many, in terms of numbers, how many electric vehicles are on the road now in the UK. I mean, are we approaching 1 million yet? I think we're probably getting
about
Yeah, just
700,000.
right,
So,
not far off, yeah.
but we certainly need. I used some public chargers yesterday on the motorway, and there wasn't anyone there. It's great. I drove up, plugged in, tapped my card, beep, it charged. No, it worked. It was fine. But I thought there's only 2 of these here, and this is on the M1. This is a busy highway. It's not sufficient yet. You kind of need, as we're starting to see emerge, the sort of charging hubs with 30 or 40 chargers is the kind of, but that's going to take, it's going to be a race to get that installed in time.
It's still a fear of the people who are not yet in the world of electric vehicles, because they may hear something in the press to say this is wildly inaccurate. Us guys who drive them a lot can probably navigate the system a little better. Yes, we'd love there to be more. Yes, we'd love there to be more of the right chargers in the right places. What I find interesting sometimes is people that I talk to who have this perception that there are just no chargers. So when I talk to them and say, okay, so let's have a look at how many there actually are, about 23,000 locations, with the point of reference being petrol stations. So, okay, so if that's the case, how many petrol stations do we think there are? Because that network you're very comfortable with. And when they find out there's only 8,300 petrol stations, suddenly there's a bit of a light bulb moment that goes on. And then if I follow that up and say, and only about 450 of those petrol stations have EV charge points at them, your Shells and your BPs of this world, if you're looking where you've always looked, you're probably going to find a problem. So this is just a mindset thing, just to sort of say, yes, there are lots more. We'd love there to be more than that, but there are a lot more than you might think if you're looking in the right place.
Yeah, indeed. And I know there's lots of apps out there to help people find public charges, but, I would love to see better signage. Just make them more visible. Why not have a uniform sign for EV charging, so that as you're driving along, you can, firstly, as an electric car driver, you can see where you need to pull off, whether that's on a motorway or an A road or wherever. But also, as somebody who might be thinking about making the switch, it helps with that visibility and gives that more, would I think give that, more reassurance that, oh, okay, actually, so if I do need to charge when I'm not at home or if I don't have off-street parking, then I'll be okay.
Because one of the things I've really started harping on about more recently is I want to charge my car while I'm not using it, as in destination charging, or what, I guess destination charging is the most commonly used term for it. But, it was, I think I first went, oh, that's how you do it. When I went in a multi-story car park in Oslo, which, as we've said before, are way ahead of everyone. And I asked the man, I said, how many chargers are there in this car park? And he went, well, there are 780. And I went, oh my God, how many parking spaces are there in this car park? There are 780. So it was a multi-story car park that could hold 780 cars, and every single space had it. It was a 7 kilowatt simple outlet that you paid for through your parking fee in some way. I can't remember quite how it worked. So, that's what I want, is wherever you can park a car legally, I want there to be a charger. That would make an enormous difference. And when you explain to people that I will not wait for my car to charge, I plug it in, I do something else where the car would normally be just sitting there doing nothing, then when I come back to it, even if it's only added 20 miles, it's added 20 miles. It's not added nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, Robert, it's joyful to hear you say that, because this is exactly what's been on my mind this week. And I was talking to somebody a couple of days ago from one of the major charge point operators who was saying, we need more destination chargers. So, I've just done another poll. Sort of
Oh, good. Well
the,
done.
Whole
the
queen.
future of electric car charging. I know, but I say, charge when you park, not when you need to.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
asking people, so, what do you think? Do we need more destination charges? Do we need more rapid charges? Do we need both? And so far, 25% of people are saying we need more destination charges. So
Yeah.
it's kind of, absolutely. Just when you're parked up, you can, add a bit of range and off you go.
The mindset of charge when you stop, you don't stop to charge. So it just gets factored into your life, and it doesn't take any time at all because, like you both say, you're doing something else, whether that's sleeping, eating, shopping, gym, theatre, whatever.
It's also, I think, worth, I always want to sort of remind people if you run a pub or a cafe or a hotel that's got a car park, I can guarantee you, if you put destination charges in your car park, you'll get more customers. And I've had that fed back so many times. We went to a long time ago, a hotel in Cornwall that I would never have stayed in because I wouldn't have found it and I wouldn't have thought of it. And it had destination charges. And I rang up and said, "Have you got any rooms?" They said, "Yeah." And I straight there, plugged in. And they said, they're never empty. Every night, they had 6 destination charges. Every night, there's 6 electric cars there, and there's 6 people staying in the hotel as a result of that. All through the year. It's kind of a pretty obvious thing to do. And I didn't pay directly for the electricity, but I'm going to admit that I did steal some of the soap because it was really nice. So now the other thing that we're definitely facing, and having come back from Australia recently, it's exactly the same situation there, is there's a huge amount of people who want an electric car and they can't get one because of the availability of them. And I think that's affecting this country too. It seems to be fairly universal. I think everywhere except China. I think if you want an electric car in China, you go into a shop and you buy one. It's easy as that. But is that something you're having to deal with here? That those sort of people having to wait for cars?
I think anecdotally, I've spoken to lots of people who've had to wait months, sort of above and beyond their original delivery date, or they've been put off their first choice of electric car because they simply couldn't wait for over a year, for example. And the supply chain issues are well documented. The shortage of semiconductors, the war in Ukraine. And there are other factors that have really slowed down production, even though, we have this growing demand for electric cars. And for fear of sounding like a broken record, I did a survey.
Okay. I love your survey, Jill.
So I asked, electric car drivers or would-be electric car drivers, how long have you had to wait for your car, or are you having to wait for your car? So I had over 1,000 responses.
Wow.
I would have had more, but sadly the poll just stopped working after 3 days. But anyway,
Right.
so I had over 1,000 responses. And 15% of those people said that they received their car within 30 days, which is
right. Wow.
which is pretty good. 26% took delivery within 3 months.
Right.
And I think what's interesting is that almost a fifth, so 19%, did have to wait for over 12 months for delivery of their car, which is, pretty unacceptable, I think. But I think one of the interesting aspects is, kind of EV buying or leasing behavior is that I think we're hearing more and more that people seem to be quite open to looking at alternative brands. If their first choice isn't available, if it means that they can get their car quicker. So I think for me, Robert, long lead times certainly are and have been an issue. I'd like to hope it's easing up now, and I'm sure Jon will be able to talk about that. But I think it also can be a case of, knowing where to look. So, for example, I'm bound to say this, but one of the great things about ElectriX is that working with our leasing partner, CBVC, they can go out to a whole panel of funders, and very often we can get people their cars within 30 days. I did check. And our speediest delivery was just 11 days through ElectriX. So
Right.
that's super quick.
Wow.
You'd hope that
Yeah.
actually, hopefully they'd have time within that 11 days to get their charger installed, maybe. But so it's not all doom and gloom. But certainly it has been a problem.
I would support those messages, Robert. I mean, looking across the industry, yes, I think the lead time situation is easing. It's not back to where it would have been in the good old days when your volume manufacturers, Ford, Vauxhall, Renault, Peugeot, you would expect 3 to 4 weeks probably when something called stock was available. That's not really a thing anymore.
Yeah.
And the more premium marks, the BMW, Audi, Mercedes, Volvo, etc., were probably nearer 8 to 12 weeks. That was the norm 5 or 6 years ago. So we're not there yet. It's getting back. Gill mentioned a couple of things. So the semi-chip conductor thing, which caught everybody by surprise. It's not just electric vehicles, it's all vehicles, but electric vehicles do have more of these things in them. I did come across an incredible anecdote. It is only an anecdote. I can't necessarily back it up. But I did hear a story that one of the manufacturers had gone out and bought 1 million microwave ovens because the microchip in the oven was the same one to use in the car, so they could, and they will make more profit on the car than the microwave oven. So people are being very innovative around this. What I've also seen is as Gill mentioned, this quick lead time has become a currency. It's not just about, I want a BMW, I want an Audi, how much please? It's like, I've got this much to spend, what can I get reasonably quickly? And more, when I speak to some of the lease codes out there, especially CBVC, actually, the ElectriX partner, what they're finding is people are coming with that mindset. And more than saying, I want this brand, they're probably saying, I'd like something like this, but more, they're saying, I'd like anything but this brand. So they might name one they don't want. So they say, I don't want a Tesla, or I don't want a Renault. But they will say, I'm actually quite open to anything else. So if you don't want a Kia, you might consider a Hyundai, for instance, because it's a broadly similar offer. So this currency thing of lead times has become better. It is getting better. There are cars out there that you can get quite quickly, as Gill has so eloquently put. What's also happening is, as the situation eases, then discounts start to become a discussion point again with the manufacturers, because at the moment, they're not going to give any discount, really, because they don't have to. Supply massively outweighs demand. Demand outweighs supply. But as that changes, the leasing companies and the brokers will start to go back and request discounts, and that will have a positive knock-on effect with the price of these cars, because they will have to be competitively priced in order to sell when supply eases again. So there's some good stuff coming. We're not just there yet, though. Yeah.
I mean, and that the brand loyalty thing I've found fascinating. I mean, partly on as you're suggesting, a sort of universal level, but on a personal level, I remember having a conversation with I will not name the car brand representative, and I said, I've never been brand loyal. I can't bear the idea of being brand loyal. And he said, what was your car before you had an electric car? So it was Volkswagen Golf. What was it before that? A Volkswagen Golf. What was it before that? And it was like 9 Volkswagen Golfs over 30 years. That's called brand loyalty. I mean, I'm so dumb. So, and so I did have that. And then I just did it because I was used to the cars and I knew what they were like, and they're very reliable, and they're, blah, blah, blah. Normal. I mean, not any sort of, I didn't wear a VW t-shirt or have a VW hat, just drove the cars. And then I realized there was not a second thought about, oh, wait a minute, a Nissan Leaf is made by Nissan. It's not made by Volkswagen. I just got a Nissan Leaf because it was an electric car. That was, I think a lot of people have done that. I think you're right. And
I think it's more and more, it's about the capability of the car. Yes, an element of quality. So if you're in the market for a volume player, you might not be looking at a high-end BMW, but and vice versa. If you're looking at a high-end BMW, you might not be considering a Renault Zoe. But in the realms of where you're looking, you're more interested, as I've found from people I've spoken to who drive electric cars, it's more about the range, the charging speed, the capabilities of the car, some of the features of the car, and yes, you will consider a range of brands that fit your capability criteria. It's very interesting. And Tesla's a classic example, because Tesla weren't around 10 years ago. Look how many cars are on. That's disruption at its finest, because every one of those Tesla drivers didn't used to drive a Tesla.
They've conquested from other brands. Yeah, I mean, the place I saw the most stark example of that was California. So I worked in
Yeah.
California from about 2001 to 2006 quite regularly. I spent a lot of time in Los Angeles, and all the kind of TV exec people that I would come into contact with, and all the people who worked in the media had black, which is totally unsuitable for a California climate, black European cars, BMWs, Mercedes, Audis. They all had that, and they had an Audi TT, or they'd have a big Mercedes, or depending on who they were. But that was the coolest, cutting edge media hipster would be in a European car. They wouldn't be seen dead in an American car at that stage. Now you drive through Los Angeles and it's just bumper to bumper Teslas. There's no European cars at all. And if it's not a Tesla, then it's a Hyundai, Ioniq 5, or it's a Kia EV6, or it's a Nissan Leaf. It's extraordinary, that change in that and I think it's specific to California, to be fair, and to
I think
folks.
The oncoming wave of Chinese entrants, certainly into the UK market, but in other markets too, is going to add another layer of disruption, because they're going to start disrupting Tesla. Bring it on.
Yes,
fantastic.
Absolutely.
Really interesting to see, because they're going to have another consideration now.
I mean, I think it's a really good question. Is it, if you haven't got an electric car now, but you're thinking of it, is 2023 a good time to sort of make that switch? I mean, Jill, you all know about that. Have you done a poll about that?
You know what? Surprisingly not. But yeah, maybe that'll be my next one, Robert. But yeah, I'd say, it is a good idea to make the switch now, or at least to really start seriously considering it. We've got whether it's in a personal capacity, I think especially as a business, then, as I think we've talked about, sustained low rates of benefit in kind, so really low beneficial tax rates, make great financial sense to make the switch on a business basis, or indeed through a salary sacrifice scheme. So that's great. But also, I hear a lot of people say, but I'm going to wait until the technology gets a bit better. I'm going to wait until they can go a bit further. But I think, for me personally, I think it's fine as it is right now. And I could always wait for the next best thing, for the battery to get bigger or whatever. But, I've had my Kia Niro for over 2 years now. It's a 64 kilowatt hour battery. It has a real world range of about 280 miles, a little bit less in colder weather. And that's suitable for the vast majority of my journeys.
Yeah.
And I actually rarely have to use public charging infrastructure. I get quite excited when I do have to, because I feel like I should be using public chargers more just for the experience. But so I think in terms of the technology, the cars available now, we've got over 150 makes and models of EV available, on the market today. I think what's really nice is next year we've got this thing called the Zero Emission Vehicle Mandate coming online, which will mean that the car manufacturers have to produce a certain number of electric cars, which should mean that, choice becomes even greater. It should also, in theory, mean that we do actually start to reach price parity with petrol and diesel cars. And it will have the added benefit, we hope, of making the second-hand market for electric cars more buoyant, more cars on the used market, because actually most people do buy used cars, certainly in the UK. So I think when we're thinking about affordability of electric cars for more people, we need to see more used cars. We do need to reach price parity. There's no doubt about it, and it's all going to happen. But would I choose to go electric again right now? Yeah, absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt.
No, I would too. And I mean, I think those points you make are really critically important, because I had to just look back at my own life, that I didn't buy a new. I didn't even know people who bought new cars, let alone buy them themselves. I saw people in new cars, but I didn't know them. My mates all had second, third, fourth, fifth hand cars, and that was just normal. If you did buy a car, it was an old one. And I think one of the things that there's another education element in that is that a second-hand electric car is a really good option because we now know that what if the battery isn't going to fall apart and you have to throw it away like we were told again and again. The battery very likely outlasts the car, and the cars are very easy to look after. You know, you obviously want it safety checked and everything, but if it's been looked after and the wheels aren't falling off, it's a really good option, a second-hand electric car.
Yeah, absolutely. My first electric car was a second-hand Nissan Leaf, and then I sold that on. So now it's it's on its third set of owners. And I remember when I worked with Nissan back in 2012, they extended the warranty on the battery on the Nissan Leaf from 5 years to 8 years, and that was back then because they had such confidence that it wasn't going to be an issue. And I think one thing that people might think, or I've heard of, is that people think, well, when it gets to 8 years plus 1 day, it's, you know,
the battery will stop. Yes,
it's just, it's simply not the case. You know, we know, I suppose we're learning more and more, aren't we? But generally, as you say, Robert, an electric car battery is generally going to outlast an internal combustion engine.
Oh,
well,
I think, we now know that. Yeah.
If you put yourself in the shoes of the manufacturers offering those warranties, typically 8 years and 100,000 miles or whatever, does anybody honestly think that if somebody's going to offer an 8-year warranty, do they think the battery's going to last 8 years and 1 day, or do they have some real good knowledge that it's going to go a whole long way beyond 8 years so that they can confidently offer 8 years? If they thought batteries were going to break at 8 years, there's no way that you would have a warranty at 8 years. I would think more likely at least 10, possibly nearer 15. And that creates used cars and possibly third life cars as well, because car going for 15 years, you can imagine, Robert, back in your day with a Volt, you can probably have something that's had two careful owners and still have life in the battery.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yes. And I mean, when I think of the money I spent, on fifth hand, I've blown it now. I've got to say Volkswagen Golfs, but ones that have been thrashed. My goodness, they needed a lot of spare parts, a lot of attention, a lot of oil. That's very true. And I mean, I think the one of the things that kind of keeps me buoyant about this topic, because it can be a grueling battle to try and kind of argue all the cases for it, but it is the fact that the technology is developing and changing. In a sense, we've reached a point with internal combustion engines that they are remarkably reliable and long-lasting and efficient and all those things in comparison with how they were when I was a kid, 50, 60 years ago, where they constantly were a problem and would break down a lot and didn't last that long. We've developed that technology amazingly, but it's kind of static now. What can you do to a petrol or a diesel engine other than strap an electric motor to it and have it as a hybrid? That's about it. That's about as radical as it gets. Whereas the stuff that's happening in the electric vehicle world is mind-boggling. I mean, some of it's going to be, I can't tell which battery design is going to change the world, but one of them is going to. That's for sure. I mean, do you see the future as a kind of there's a lot of exciting possibilities there?
Yeah, absolutely, without a doubt. And I think, we know that vehicle-to-grid technology works. We just need to make sure that it works with all cars. And I know there's a lot of great people working on that. Vehicle to load, vehicle to home. Who knew a couple of years ago or so that you'd be able to boil your kettle in your Ioniq 5, using the battery. I think it's fascinating. And there's loads and loads of really, I would say, almost inexpensive innovation happening as well. So when we think about people who can't charge at home, who need to charge sort of on street, if you like, even simple cable gullies for the charging, so that also they can take advantage of using their own electricity supply. So there's lots of simple innovation that's happening as well in the EV world, as well as all the kind of the very high tech innovation that's exciting.
Even the cars, people sort of say to me, when are we going to have the nirvana of cars with 1,000 miles of range? And I have to talk to them and say, I don't think that's the nirvana. Actually, for me, the nirvana is actually a smaller battery. If it can give me 180, 200 miles of range, but can charge in 5 minutes, that's incredible. That's nirvana for me, because that opens up a cheaper car for widespread adoption in the retail space, rather than having, if you want a car with 1,000 miles of range because you're so nervous about range anxiety, that has to come at a price that you probably can't afford. So let's get something that's got 200 miles, charges up in the same time. That, to me, is the innovation of the future. And if we talk about the charging, I mean, there's some converting lampposts to charging, battery swapping from Neo coming in, wireless charging, mobile chargers like jerry cans, all of that stuff, load balancing from Kempower. All of this stuff is incredible innovation coming through.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, following on from your thing about the pavement channels, where you can effectively bury your own cable temporarily to charge your car. There's a street in Oxford where I think 3 or 4 people did that, who had electric cars, and everybody kind of went, "Why have you done? What was that thing you put in your thing?" They'd walk past, "Oh, so I can charge." Oh, and then by now there's like 15 electric cars on that street because everyone else has done it and gone up, and they're now understanding that you don't park outside Mr. Brown's house, because he leaves his electric car there. I'll park over there. It's a change of mindset. But that's one of the things. The other one that I did keep an eye on, and I was really pleased I did it, was I did a very long road trip in Australia in a Polestar. And with the first leg of that journey, we were where we started from and where I kind of registered all the miles and see how far we go and all that stuff. It was about 500 meters from a motorway entrance. So I drove on a city street, about 500 meters, turned down a slip road, was on a motorway, which I drove on for nearly 400 kilometers. So, i.e., I was on fast roads pretty much the whole journey. My average speed was 53 miles an hour. You don't actually drive at 70 miles an hour when, on average, when you drive on the motorway. It's way, way less.
No, that's right, absolutely. And also, certainly for the UK and maybe elsewhere as well, 99% of all journeys are under 100 miles.
Yes. Yeah.
So for most people, those long journeys are really quite occasional.
Very unusual.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, what if someone is listening to this now and has listened to us waffle on about all the advantages? If they're going to make the switch to an electric car, and I just know so many people who are talking about it, so there's clearly a lot of people in that position. I mean, what are the essential sort of facts or tips or suggestions that you'd make? Can I start with you, Jon? What they should keep in mind, what they need to think about if they're going to do that and they haven't considered it before.
I would say one of the crucial things is take a little time to try and educate yourself in a slightly different mindset. And one of the best ways to do that is talk to EV drivers, people who are there, who've done it, who've been through the challenges, been through the pain, and in a much darker world 7, 8, 9 years ago. But I would say the more you pick up on the subject, it's a bit like learning a language. The more you learn about it, the better you get at it. So I would urge people just to have a look into it and don't approach EV driving in the same way that you've always driven petrol or diesel vehicles, because you'll probably come unstuck. So we're talking about things like taking the opportunity to plan a journey. Don't look on that as admin or hassle. Look on it as just a slight change in mindset to unlock the benefits of EV driving, financial or environmental or both, or pleasurable driving. So I would say take the time to get yourself a bit of education, talk to some drivers, and you know what, overall, enjoy it.
Yeah, no, I think that's very good. Yeah. Have you got anything to add to that, Jill? I mean, that was a fairly good suggestions there from Jon.
Yeah, totally agree. Talking to other electric car drivers, and I think as well, if you can actually either as a passenger or even better, if you can have a test drive in an electric car. Over the years, I've been involved in hundreds of community test drives, for example, and without exception, everybody has emerged from the car with a massive grin on their face. Because they've just been so impressed by how the car drives. So, talk to people, have a test drive. We've got loads of really great information. We've got a jargon buster on our website, lvelectrics.co.uk. We've got lots of guides, guide to charging, guide to electric cars, all sorts of guides and information on the ElectriX website. And then, if you do decide, or when you decide to make the switch, we can help you with everything else.
Right. No, that's very good, and we'll put all the links to that in the show notes for this episode, because I think it's a very, I've had a look at it. It is very comprehensive, and it is all those myths, because I think the easiest thing, as we're seeing in the press every now and then, fairly regularly, the easiest thing is to be dismissive and go, oh, it's not going to work, and they don't work for me, and oh, they're useless, and you've got to throw the batteries away, and all the huge long list of negatives that are flying around in the traditional press. And it's very important.
Maybe that's the other piece of advice, is don't believe everything you read.
Well, yes, I think that's fairly critically important. And I think that is one of the things I've learned in the last many years doing this, is that I would listen to like the radio news and just accept what I was hearing because I didn't know. And then I'd hear people talking about electric cars and electric transport, and I go, well, no, that's actually wrong. They're not right, but it sounds authoritative because it's someone on the radio or on the TV and they say something, and you think, and I go, well, no, that's actually technically, critically wrong. And then you think, well, that report I heard about the health service or I don't know what, any industry, I don't know anything about that. I have to assume that's correct, but it's a bit of it's sort of opened up a door of worry for me, because I just go. Because every now and then you'll hear something, or you'll read something and go, that isn't the case. That is not true. It's a really hard thing to counter.
Yeah.
But I think you two have done a pretty good job.
Thank you. One more thing I was going to say, just looking at the uptake figures, because I think they speak volumes as well.
Yes.
Because people are clearly deciding to go electric. And 5 years ago, so January 2018, there were about 34,000 all-electric cars on the roads. January this year, we're looking at 625,000. And my maths is absolutely terrible. But when I tried to Google how to do the percentage increase, it came out at 1,738% increase.
Yeah.
So anybody listening to this, please feel free to tell me I've got that terribly wrong. But one way
I think you're right, though. Yeah.
That's significant, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a huge change. It is, and I mean, it's also very visible. If I notice it when I go to a town I'm not used to. So Leeds yesterday is full of electric cars. And I sort of think of, it's electric cars, it's for people in London and the southeast who have got the money and all that stuff. And where I live, the Cotswolds, there's lots of electric cars here. There's far more huge diesel Range Rovers. I just need to get that particular comment in the Cotswolds, and there are electric cars. But, I would have thought Leeds, so there won't be. There's loads in Leeds, really a lot. And there's chargers. And we got a coffee at a certain fast food outlet. There's 3 Instavolt rapid chargers in the car park, and you go, that's, it is spreading across the whole country, and it is a noticeable change.
Absolutely.
Let's just hope it keeps going. I mean, guys, it's been amazing talking to you. It's really cheered me up. I think I was a little bit sort of exhausted by the kind of constant deluge of negativity, and hearing and also that your knowledge of this is not based on theory or something you read. It's actually on day-to-day experience of dealing with people and dealing with electric vehicles, which is
it is encouraging to think that the reality of living with these EVs as we do is way, way different to the fears that some people may have.
Yes.
So all we can do is continue trying to tell people, actually, just if you experience what we experience, we're not necessarily being evangelical about this. There are challenges here. But actually, it's also thoroughly enjoyable, thoroughly doable, whatever your challenges are. People say, no, you can't drive to Scotland, you can't drive to Cornwall. Of course you can, just with a different mindset. All we're doing is effectively telling people how to do it without making it hard.
Yes,
indeed. And I think, a little while ago, my 8-year-old daughter started asking me about the 2030 date. And I think, gosh, if she kind of gets it, then there is absolutely hope, isn't there? Because my children will never, they'll only ever drive electric cars.
Yeah, no, absolutely true. On that very optimistic, upbeat note, I'd just like to thank both of you. Thanks so much, Jon and Gill. That's been really good to talk to you. We'll see you again soon, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Well, I haven't even mentioned the Fully Charged live show. You might be there.
Oh yeah, I think ElectriX, headline sponsor, Fully Charged Live this year. Please come and see us.
There we
It's
go.
the
We
best
will.
event.
Yes.
We will both be there. Looking forward to it, south and north.
Well, that was great talking to Gill and Jon. I really enjoyed it. They are such fun. If you're coming to Fully Charged Live, do go and see their stands. They'll be there all the time. Gill's amazing. She's so positive and such an incredible sort of, it's not evangelist, it's not the right word, but just an incredible communicator on a kind of really, understanding people's lives and, all that stuff. She's just great. They're both really good. And if you run a vehicle fleet, if you're in a big company or you want your company to adopt electric vehicles, Jon Burdekin is an incredible contact. It's really worth keeping an eye on what he's up to. All the links to both what they do are in the show notes of this episode. But that's it. As always, if you have been, thank you for listening.